I watched Sheriff Corinne hammer that fake easement sign into my gate post with a satisfaction that made my blood boil. She turned to me with that smug smile, her hand resting on her gun like she owned the world. "This is public access now," she said, tapping her badge. "Touch this sign and I will arrest you for obstruction." What she did not know was that I owned every inch of gravel leading to her own front door, and in 3 days, I was going to cut off her only way home. My name is Tom, and for 37 years I had called this ranch home. 3 generations of my family had worked this land, built these fences, and earned every acre through honest sweat and determination. The morning sun painted the pastures gold as I walked to check on the cattle, just like my grandfather had done decades before me. Our property sat at the end of a long gravel driveway that wound through the hills for nearly 2 miles before connecting to the county road. 5 other families shared this private drive, including Sheriff Corinne Miller, who had moved to the area just 6 months earlier. When she first arrived, I had welcomed her like any good neighbor would. "Beautiful country out here," she had said that first day, standing beside her patrol car in my driveway. "I can see why your family never wanted to leave." Her words seemed genuine then. She wore her uniform with what I thought was professional pride, and I respected the badge she carried. Law enforcement was a noble calling, and I believed she would serve our community well. The shared driveway had never been a problem before. All of us who lived on it understood the arrangement. It was private property, maintained by those who used it, but we all had legal access agreements that went back decades. My grandfather had surveyed the land himself and made sure everything was documented properly. Those first few weeks, Sheriff Corinne would wave when she drove past on her way to work. She seemed friendly enough, though there was something in her eyes that I could not quite place, a hardness that did not match her polite words. I should have paid more attention to that warning sign. The ranch kept me busy from dawn to dusk. Cattle do not care about your personal problems or the weather. They need water, feed, and medical attention whether you feel like providing it or not. This routine had been my anchor through everything life had thrown at me, including the death of my wife 3 years earlier. Some evenings I would sit on the porch with my coffee and watch the sunset paint the sky purple and orange. The silence out here was different from city quiet. It was alive with the sounds of nature, the distant lowing of cattle, and the whisper of wind through grass. This was peace, I thought. This was how life was supposed to be. But peace, I was about to learn, is a fragile thing, and some people seem determined to shatter it. The first sign of trouble came on a Tuesday morning in late September. I was repairing a section of fence when Sheriff Corinne pulled up in her patrol car, lights flashing for no apparent reason. She climbed out wearing her full tactical gear, looking like she was responding to an armed robbery instead of making a social call. "Morning, Tom," she said, but her tone had changed. Gone was the neighborly warmth from our earlier conversations. This was all business, and the business felt hostile. "Morning, Sheriff," I replied, setting down my tools. "Something I can help you with." She walked closer, her hand resting casually on her radio. "I have been getting some complaints about access issues on this road, public safety concerns." I frowned, genuinely confused. What kind of complaints? Everyone who lives here has been using this road for years without any problems. "That may be," she said, pulling out a small notebook, "but I need to make sure we are following proper procedures for emergency access. Fire trucks, ambulances, that sort of thing." Her words sounded reasonable, but something about her demeanor set off alarm bells in my head. The way she was studying my property, taking notes, measuring distances with her eyes. This was not about emergency access. "Well," I said carefully, "this is private property, but we have maintained it to county standards. Emergency vehicles have never had trouble getting through." Corinne's jaw tightened slightly. Private property or not, public safety comes first. I may need to make some recommendations to the county about access requirements. That night, I could not shake the feeling that something was wrong. I pulled out the old metal file box where my grandfather had kept all the property documents. Deeds, surveys, easement agreements, everything was there in black and white. The driveway was entirely on my land, maintained by me, with legal access granted to the other property owners through formal agreements. Everything was legitimate and had been for decades. 2 days later, Corinne was back. This time she brought questions about my cattle permits, my water rights, and whether I had proper insurance for people traveling on my portion of the road. Each visit felt like an interrogation disguised as official business. "You seem to have a lot of questions lately," I said during her third visit that week. She smiled, but it did not reach her eyes. "Just doing my job, Tom, making sure everything is up to code." "And if it is not?" "Well," she said, adjusting her gun belt, "then we will have to discuss bringing everything into compliance." The word compliance hung in the air like a threat. I had lived my entire life following the law, paying my taxes, and respecting authority. But I was starting to understand that Sheriff Corinne had a very different definition of compliance than I did. Her definition seemed to involve me doing whatever she wanted, whenever she wanted it, simply because she wore a badge. That evening, I called my neighbor Bill, who lived 2 properties down the shared driveway. Bill had been here almost as long as I had, and I trusted his judgment. "She has been asking me questions too," Bill said quietly. "Wants to know about property lines, who maintains what sections of the road. Tom, I think she is planning something." "Like what?" "I do not know," Bill replied. "But whatever it is, I do not think it is going to be good for any of us." The trap was sprung on a cold October morning that I will never forget. I was loading feed into my truck when I heard the sound of hammering coming from the direction of my front gate. The rhythm was aggressive, deliberate, like someone driving railroad spikes. I walked down the driveway to investigate and found Sheriff Corinne installing a large metal sign at my gate. The sign was official-looking, painted in county colors with bold lettering that read, "Public easement, no blocking or restriction of access." My blood ran cold as I read those words. "What the hell is this?" I called out, walking faster toward the gate. Corinne looked up from her work, a satisfied smirk playing across her face. "Public easement notification," she said, giving the sign post one final slam with her hammer. "This driveway is now classified as public access for emergency and governmental purposes." "This is private property," I said, fighting to keep my voice level. "You cannot just declare a public easement without legal proceedings." She straightened up and faced me directly, her hand moving to rest on her gun. "I can, and I did. This road serves multiple residences and must remain accessible for public safety. Any attempt to restrict access will result in immediate arrest for obstruction of governmental duties." I stared at the sign, trying to process what was happening. Where is the court order? Where is the documentation? You cannot just put up a sign and claim eminent domain. "The documentation is on file with the county," she lied smoothly. "And unless you want to spend the day in jail, I suggest you accept this decision and move on." That afternoon, I drove straight to the county courthouse. I spoke with the clerk of courts, the property records office, and anyone else who would listen. There was no easement filing, No court order, no legal documentation of any kind. Sheriff Corinne had fabricated the entire thing. When I returned home, I found her patrol car parked in my driveway. She was taking photographs of my property, my equipment, and my livestock. She looked up when she saw me approaching. "Problem with the easement sign?" she asked innocently. "You know damn well there is no legal easement," I said, anger finally breaking through my restraint. Her expression hardened. "Are you questioning my authority?" "I am questioning your honesty." Corinne stepped closer, her voice dropping to a menacing whisper. "Let me make something very clear, Tom. I am the law in this county. What I say goes. And I say this is public access now. Touch that sign and I will arrest you. Block this road and I will arrest you. Keep questioning my decisions and I will find reasons to arrest you that you have not even thought of yet." She climbed back into her patrol car and drove away, leaving me standing there with rage burning in my chest and the fake easement sign mocking me from my own gate. That night I called every neighbor on our shared driveway. Word traveled fast in a small community, and by morning everyone knew what had happened. But instead of support or outrage, I was met with nervous silence. "I cannot get involved, Tom," Bill said when I called him. "She has already been by here asking questions about my property taxes and my septic system. I have got enough problems without making an enemy of the sheriff." One by one, my neighbors distanced themselves from the situation. They were scared, and I could not blame them. Corinne had made it clear that anyone who opposed her would face consequences. I was alone in this fight, facing a corrupt sheriff who was willing to fabricate legal documents to get what she wanted. But she had made one crucial mistake. She assumed I would back down like everyone else. The harassment began the very next day and quickly became a calculated campaign of intimidation designed to break my will. Sheriff Corinne seemed to have made tormenting me her full-time job, and she brought the full weight of her badge to bear on that mission. Every morning at 6 a.m. sharp, her patrol car would come roaring up my driveway, lights flashing and siren wailing. She would claim to be responding to anonymous complaints about everything from loud machinery to suspicious vehicles. Of course, there were never any real complaints, and she knew it. "Someone called in a report of gunfire from your property," she would say, standing on my porch with her hand on her weapon. "I have not fired a gun in weeks," I would reply, but she would insist on investigating anyway. This meant walking through my property, examining my equipment, and asking pointed questions about my activities, my finances, and my legal right to be there. The visits became daily, then twice daily. Corinne would arrive with backup officers who looked increasingly uncomfortable with the obvious harassment but were too afraid of their boss to speak up. Deputy Martinez, a young man I had known since he was a boy, would not even make eye contact with me anymore. "Tom," he whispered during one visit when Corinne was distracted, "I am sorry about this. This is not right." But not right was not enough to stop it. Corinne began targeting my livestock next. She claimed to receive reports of animal welfare concerns and would demand to inspect my cattle, looking for any excuse to cite me for violations. When she could not find any real problems, she started manufacturing them. "This water trough looks stagnant," she would say, pointing to perfectly clean water. "That fence post is loose," she would claim, shaking a post that was solid as a rock. Each fabricated violation came with threats of fines, legal action, and potential seizure of my animals. The stress was overwhelming, and I could feel it taking a toll on my health. I was not sleeping, barely eating, and jumping at every sound. The worst part was the isolation. My neighbors had completely withdrawn from any contact with me, terrified that Corinne would turn her attention to them. The mail carrier started leaving my mail at the end of the driveway instead of coming to the house. Even the feed delivery truck began dropping my orders at the gate rather than driving up to the barn. Corinne had effectively quarantined me on my own property. 3 weeks into the harassment campaign, she escalated again. I woke up one morning to find her patrol car parked outside my gate, positioned so that anyone trying to access the shared driveway would have to stop and explain themselves to her. She was conducting what she called safety checkpoints on my private driveway. "This is harassment," I told her directly during one of these encounters. "This is law enforcement," she replied coldly. "I have reports of suspicious activity in this area, and I am investigating." "What suspicious activity?" "That is classified information." The psychological toll was devastating. Every day brought new threats, new fabricated violations, and new reminders that she could destroy my life whenever she chose. I began to understand how corrupt officials could drive innocent people to desperation or suicide. The constant stress was unbearable. But Corinne made a crucial error in her campaign of terror. In her eagerness to break me, she overplayed her hand. During one particularly aggressive visit, she brought 3 patrol cars and 6 officers to my property, claiming to investigate a domestic disturbance that never happened. As I watched those officers reluctantly participate in her harassment, I realized something important. Corinne was not just abusing me. She was abusing her authority, her officers, and the entire system she had sworn to protect. And that gave me an idea. If Corinne wanted to play games with legal authority, maybe it was time I reminded her that authority comes with limits. Badge or no badge, she was still subject to the law. The question was whether I had the courage to fight back against someone who could arrest me on fabricated charges whenever she wanted. That night, staring at my grandfather's property documents spread across the kitchen table, I realized I might have more power in this situation than I had initially understood. Corinne had been so focused on intimidating me that she had overlooked a crucial detail about the property she was trying to control. The breaking point came on a gray November morning when I found Sheriff Corinne rifling through my truck. She had used bolt cutters to break the lock on my toolbox and was searching through my personal belongings like a common thief. "What the hell are you doing?" I shouted, running toward my vehicle. She looked up casually, as if breaking into someone's truck was perfectly normal behavior. "Anonymous tip about stolen property," she said, holding up my grandfather's antique hammer. "I need to check the serial numbers on your tools." "That hammer is a family heirloom," I said, fighting to keep my voice from shaking with rage. "My grandfather bought it in 1952. "We will see about that," she replied, dropping it into an evidence bag. "I am confiscating this pending investigation." As I watched her steal my grandfather's hammer, something inside me finally snapped. Not into violence or shouting, but into a cold, calculating fury that cleared my mind like nothing had in weeks. I was done being a victim. That afternoon, I called my nephew Jake, who worked as a paralegal in the state capitol. Jake had always been the smart one in the family, the one who went to college and understood how systems worked. "Uncle Tom," he said after I explained the situation, "this is not just harassment. This is criminal misconduct under color of authority, but fighting a corrupt sheriff is not easy. You need leverage." "What kind of leverage?" "The kind that makes her more afraid of you than you are of her." Jake drove out that weekend and spent 2 days going through every document related to my property. What he found changed everything. "Uncle Tom," he said, spreading out a survey map on my kitchen table, "do you realize what you own here?" I looked at the map, confused. 320 acres, same as always. "Not the land," Jake said, pointing to a series of lines marked in red ink. "The access road. This entire driveway from the county road all the way to your front door is entirely on your property." "I know that. But do you know what that means legally?" Jake's eyes were bright with excitement. "Every single person who lives back here, including Sheriff Karen, is using your private road to access their property. They have easement agreements that allow them to use it, but you own it." I was starting to understand. "So if I wanted to, you could legally block access to anyone not covered by those easement agreements. And here is the beautiful part. You can revoke access for anyone who violates the terms of their easement." Jake pulled out another document. "Look at this. Every easement agreement on this road contains a clause about maintaining peaceful use of the property. Harassment, intimidation, or illegal activities are grounds for immediate termination of access rights." My heart started pounding as the implications became clear. "You are saying I could legally cut off her access to her own house?" "I am saying," Jake replied with a grin, "that Sheriff Karen has been harassing the one person who controls her only way home." We spent the rest of that weekend documenting everything. Jake helped me compile a legal file that included every incident of harassment, every fabricated violation, and every threat Karen had made. We photographed the fake easement sign, recorded times and dates of her visits, and gathered statements from neighbors who were willing to talk privately. Most importantly, we researched the exact legal procedures for revoking access rights on private property. "The law is very clear," Jake explained. "As long as you follow proper notification procedures and give reasonable time for alternative access arrangements, you have absolute right to control who uses your private road. Even a sheriff. Especially a sheriff who is abusing her authority." That night, I sat on my porch and looked down the long gravel driveway that stretched toward the county road. For the first time in months, I felt something other than fear and frustration. I felt power. Karen had spent weeks trying to intimidate me into submission, using her badge as a weapon against an innocent man who just wanted to be left alone. She had stolen my property, harassed my livestock, and made my life a living hell. But in her arrogance, she had overlooked the one thing that could destroy her campaign of terror. She lived at the end of my driveway, completely dependent on my goodwill for access to her own home. And my goodwill had just run out. The next phase required precision, patience, and absolutely perfect legal documentation. I could not afford to make a single mistake that would give Karen an opportunity to arrest me or claim I was acting illegally. Every step had to be by the book, unassailable in court, and executed with professional competence. Jake connected me with Sarah Chen, a property rights attorney who specialized in easement law. Sarah had built her reputation defending landowners against government overreach, and when she heard my story, her eyes lit up with the same righteous anger I had been feeling. "This is textbook abuse of authority," she said during our first meeting. "But we need to be smarter than she is. If we are going to cut off her access, we do it so perfectly that she has no legal recourse whatsoever." Sarah walked my property with a professional surveyor, documenting every boundary marker, measuring exact distances, and confirming that the entire access road was indeed on my land. The surveyor, an older man named Peterson, shook his head as he worked. 40 years I have been doing this job, Peterson said, and I have never seen someone harass the person who controls their only access road. That is like biting the hand that feeds you. While the survey was being completed, Sarah drafted the legal notifications. Under state law, I was required to give 30 days written notice before revoking any access rights. The notice had to specify the reasons for revocation and provide opportunity for the affected party to remedy any violations. "We are going to make this so airtight," Sarah explained, "that even if she gets the best lawyers in the state, they will not be able to find a single flaw in our procedure." The formal notice was delivered by certified mail to Sheriff Corinne Miller on a Wednesday morning. I made sure to be watching from my kitchen window when she opened it. The letter was professionally written and legally precise. It informed Corinne that her access rights to the private driveway were being revoked due to ongoing harassment, intimidation, and abuse of authority that violated the peaceful use clause in her easement agreement. She had 30 days to cease all harassment or face permanent loss of access to her property. I could see her reading the letter through her patrol car windshield. Her face went through several interesting color changes before settling on a deep red that suggested high blood pressure. 20 minutes later, she was pounding on my front door. "You cannot do this," she screamed when I opened the door. "This is obstruction of justice. This is interference with a law enforcement officer." "This is private property law," I replied calmly, holding up a copy of the certified letter. "As explained in this notice, you have 30 days to cease your harassment campaign. If you comply, your access rights will be restored." "I am not harassing you. I am investigating legitimate complaints." "What complaints?" I asked. "Filed by whom, when, where is the documentation?" For the first time since this whole ordeal began, Corinne had no answer. She stood there on my porch, sputtering with rage, but unable to produce a single piece of evidence to support her claims of legitimate law enforcement activity. "You are making a big mistake," she finally said, her voice dropping to a threatening whisper. "I can make your life very difficult." "Sheriff," I said, "you have been making my life difficult for months. Now it is your turn to experience some difficulty." Over the next 2 weeks, Corinne's harassment actually intensified. She seemed to think that escalating her intimidation tactics would force me to back down. She brought more officers, conducted more fake investigations, and made more threats. But every incident was carefully documented by the security cameras Jake had helped me install around my property. Every threat was recorded, every fabricated violation was photographed, and every abuse of authority was preserved for posterity. Sarah reviewed the footage regularly. "She is giving us everything we need for a federal civil rights lawsuit," she said with satisfaction. "Keep recording. Let her dig her own grave." On day 29 of the 30-day notice period, I received a call from the county attorney's office. Corinne had apparently tried to get a court order preventing me from blocking her access. The county attorney, a man named Williams who I had known for years, sounded embarrassed. "Tom," he said, "I have to ask, are you really going to block the sheriff's access to her own home?" "Mr. Williams," I replied, "if you lived next door to someone who harassed you every day, stole your property, and threatened to arrest you for crimes you did not commit, would you want them using your driveway?" There was a long pause. "I see your point," he said finally. "Just try not to make this into a circus, okay? The last thing this county needs is negative publicity about our law enforcement." "Then maybe," I suggested, "your law enforcement should stop breaking the law." On day 30, I was ready to spring the trap. At exactly 6:00 a.m. on the 31st day, I drove my tractor down to the entrance of my driveway and positioned two massive concrete barriers across the access road. The barriers weighed 800 pounds each and could not be moved without heavy equipment. Between them, I installed a large metal gate with a heavy-duty lock. The sign I posted was professionally made and legally precise. Private property access, REVOKED, due to harassment and abuse, TRSPSSERS, will be PROSSUTED. I was back in my kitchen drinking coffee when Sheriff Corinne's patrol car came roaring down the county road at 7:30 a.m., undoubtedly heading to work as she did every morning. I watched through my window as she approached the blocked entrance. The sound of her brakes squealing could be heard from half a mile away. Corinne sat in her patrol car for a full minute, staring at the concrete barriers like she could not believe what she was seeing. Then she climbed out and walked to the gate, pulling and pushing on it like she thought it might magically open. That was when she started screaming. "Open this gate right now," she bellowed toward my house. "This is a public road." I walked down to meet her, carrying a copy of the survey documents and my legal notification letter. Several of my security cameras were recording everything, and I had called Jake to witness the confrontation from a safe distance. "Good morning, Sheriff," I said pleasantly. "Can I help you with something?" "You cannot block this road," she screamed, her face purple with rage. "I live back there. I have to get to work." "This is a private road on my property," I replied calmly. "Your access rights were revoked 30 days ago due to ongoing harassment and abuse of authority. The revocation is now in effect. I will arrest you for obstruction." "For what obstruction?" I asked. "I am standing on my own property, controlling access to my own driveway. What law am I breaking?" Corinne seemed to realize that she was being recorded. She looked around and noticed Jake standing nearby with his phone out, documenting everything. Her voice dropped, but the fury remained. "You are interfering with a law enforcement officer." "No," I said. "I am exercising my property rights. If you want access to this road, you can apply for a new easement through proper legal channels. Until then, you are trespassing." "How am I supposed to get home?" "That is not my problem," I replied. "You should have considered that before you decided to harass me for months." Over the next hour, Corinne tried everything. She called for backup, but the deputies who arrived looked embarrassed and refused to take any action when they realized the situation was entirely legal. She called her supervisor, but the county attorney had already informed law enforcement that I was within my rights. She even tried calling a tow truck to move the concrete barriers, but the truck driver took one look at the survey documents and refused to touch anything on private property without a court order. By noon, a crowd had gathered. Word travels fast in a small town, and everyone wanted to see the sheriff who had been blocked from her own driveway. Corinne's neighbors were particularly interested, since they were also affected by the access shutdown. Mrs. Henderson, who lived 2 houses down from Corinne, approached me nervously. "Tom," she said quietly, "I know this is about Corinne, but my husband has a heart condition. If we have an emergency—" "Mrs. Henderson," I replied, "your easement agreement is not affected. I have prepared a temporary access arrangement for all innocent neighbors. You will receive new gate keys this afternoon." Relief flooded her face. "Thank you," she whispered. "We never supported what she was doing to you." But Corinne heard the exchange, and it pushed her over the edge. "This is ridiculous," she screamed. "I'm a sworn law enforcement officer. I have authority in this county." "Your authority," I said, ends at my property line, and right now you are trespassing." Karen stood there for another 30 minutes, alternating between threats and pleading. She tried claiming emergency powers, invoking public safety, and even suggesting that I was interfering with national security somehow. Nothing worked. Finally, she climbed back into her patrol car and drove away. But instead of giving up, she drove to the other end of the county road, looking for another way to access her property. There was none. My land surrounded the only access point for miles. That evening, I watched from my porch as Corinne's patrol car drove slowly past my blocked driveway one more time. She was stuck, and we both knew it. The hunter had become the hunted, and the power dynamic had completely reversed. The next few days were the most satisfying of my life. Corinne was forced to park her patrol car at the county road and walk 2 miles through rough terrain to reach her house. Sometimes she would make this journey multiple times per day, carrying groceries, equipment, and whatever else she needed. I watched her struggle past my gate each morning and evening, her uniform wrinkled and muddy, her authority reduced to nothing by a simple property rights law. The other neighbors received their new gate keys as promised. I met with each family individually, explaining that their access was secure as long as they maintained the peaceful use requirements of their easements. Everyone was professional and grateful, understanding that this was about Corinne's behavior, not community punishment. Word of the situation spread throughout the county. The local newspaper picked up the story with the headline, "Sheriff Blocked from Home by Property Owner." The article was factual and balanced, but it painted a clear picture of law enforcement abuse and citizen response. Corinne's superiors were not pleased. Having your sheriff make headlines for harassing citizens is not good for anyone's career. Within a week, I received a phone call from Captain Morrison, Corinne's direct supervisor. "Mr. Thompson," he said, "I think we need to have a conversation about resolving this situation." "I am listening," I replied. "Sheriff Miller is willing to apologize for any misunderstandings that may have occurred. She would like to discuss restoring normal access arrangements." "Captain Morrison," I said, "there were no misunderstandings. There was systematic harassment, theft of personal property, fabrication of legal documents, and abuse of authority. If Sheriff Miller wants access to her property, she can start by returning my grandfather's hammer and removing that fake easement sign." 2 days later, Corinne appeared at my gate without her uniform. She was wearing civilian clothes and looked defeated in a way that satisfied something deep in my soul. "I brought your hammer back," she said quietly, holding up the evidence bag. "And the sign." She gestured toward a pile of metal pieces beside the road. The fake easement sign had been removed and dismantled. "I want to go home," she said simply. "Then we can discuss access arrangements," I replied. "But understand that any future harassment will result in permanent revocation of your access rights. This is your only warning." Corinne nodded and drove away. The next morning, I unlocked the gate and moved the barriers aside. But the damage to her reputation was permanent. Within 3 months, Corinne was transferred to a different county. The official reason was administrative restructuring, but everyone knew the truth. She had been quietly removed for conduct unbecoming of a law enforcement officer. 6 months later, I received a letter from the state attorney general's office. They were investigating complaints about Corinne's conduct in her new position. Apparently, she had not learned her lesson and was trying the same intimidation tactics on other citizens. I provided them with copies of all my documentation, including the security camera footage of her harassment campaign. The investigation led to her termination and permanent revocation of her law enforcement certification. Today, I still live on the same ranch my grandfather built. The shared driveway operates peacefully, maintained by neighbors who respect each other and understand that property rights are not suggestions. The fake easement sign is gone, and my grandfather's hammer sits in its rightful place in my workshop. Sometimes justice takes time. Sometimes it requires standing up to people who abuse their authority. And sometimes the best revenge is simply refusing to be a victim. Corinne learned that badges do not grant unlimited power, and I learned that standing up to bullies is always worth the risk. The ranch is peaceful again, and peace, I have learned, is something worth fighting for.